All right, welcome to week 3. I'm going to do this video. It might be a little longer than normal, just to cover the bases of where I need to be for this week, okay, or where you all need to be. And so I want to talk about really this transition to Roman Republic to Roman Empire. I want to talk about families, but I think I'm going to leave Christianity off until next week. So week 4, we'll talk about Christianity, and then there'll be an exam right after that. Okay, and so that's how it works in the summer courses, is that it's abbreviated, and so every other week you're having a exam, but next week will be the midterm. So pretty crazy that we're already here. So let's talk about a couple of things. First, I want to get into Etruscan society. The Etruscans were a very wealthy society that kind of grows up out of Greek and Roman cultures, and it's a melding of the two. There are some aspects that I want you to be able to understand about Etruscan culture. One is the government. The government they've got this self-governing idea. They've got fortified city-states, and then there's an agrarian society that really grows up, and a dictator kind of comes into place there, okay, out of the Etruscan society. The second aspect would be religion. They're polytheistic. They're ritualistic, and they're influenced by the Greeks. And so this really is this melding. The Etruscan society is this melding of Greeks and Romans kind of coming together. And that is this middle point that's going to lead to the Roman Republic and eventually the Roman Empire. Okay. Third of the Etruscan aspects that I want you to understand is women. I want you to see in the reading this week women and really the role that they play. They start to appear in public. We start to see them in art. They are literate. They took part in athletic contests, which hadn't happened before. And then there's always these depictions of husbands and wives. Now, this is interesting because we don't see that during any time period before this. And so we start to see this focus on the family. Now, if we remember the philosophers and some of the things that were going on there, we know that we start to see some of that taking place, and this is really a focus on a family which we hadn't seen prior to this point. And so depictions of husbands and wives in Etruscan art really show that there's a focus on the family, okay? The Etruscans is what bridges this gap between Greeks and Romans, and you get the Etruscan society that's happening through the upper peninsula of Italy, and it's going to start to grow. And this turns into a Roman society. The Roman society, you start to get a government that has a military power to it. You have an emperor. They start to elect governing officials. That's kind of the Roman society and republic that starts to come out of that. Within the family, if we're talking about family, I know there's a question or a discussion post this week that I want you to take a look at, or be able to explain the family in Roman society. Father is the head of the household. The household resembles the state in some respects. You could sell your children and your wife if you're head of the household. And then there's this ancestral worship that goes back past the paternal line, okay? So you're always looking to the paternal line as a way to have your ancestral worship. There would be statues or depictions of your father's family in the household that you would then worship as this ancestral worship and where you came from. Women, similar to earlier cultures, women were ruled by men. They do have a greater inheritance if she stayed 3 consecutive nights away from her husband, okay? So if she wasn't full-time living with her husband, she may get a greater inheritance from her family because of that. Upper-class women had greater influence and respect, and then their main purpose, though, is still to raise children. They do keep kind of the books or the accounts, and then they are over the slaves of the household, okay? They're an advisor in the family council. We need to understand that women aren't necessarily property, but they kind of are property during this time. Children are still not really heard of. Okay, we're not really talking about children. A mother was supposed to raise the children, and we kind of move on through that. Okay. There's a swift end to the Roman Republic, or not a swift end, but of the monarchy of 509, and the Roman Republic starts to build out of that. And this is 509 BCE, or BC, if you will. The Constitution of Unwritten Laws and Customs comes out, and then consuls or kings start to kind of take hold during this time. They are granted a year term. They're voted in for year terms, and citizens had a right to appeal to the city. You could move to the Senate for a one-year term if you were elected, and then slow action, but not a lot of change within the government. Okay. Early Roman Republic civilization. We see a melding of Greek and Romans that happens through the Etruscans. They're bilingual. They studied Greek literature. Religion is heavily influenced by the Greeks and Greek mythology. The family was at the center of religion. And there is this idea of religion being patriotic, or patriotism, a role in patriotism, that you adhere to the God of whoever is over your city or city-state at that time. And that really melds you together with your city-state. Okay, so you would go somewhere else and you would still really worship that God that was over your city-state. Okay, education was in the home, mostly boys in the beginning, but women, girls start to get educated near the end of the Roman Republic and into the Roman Empire. It really was for reading, writing, calculating, and it was all about agriculture and farming. Okay, you still had that ancestral worship in the Roman Republic. Education was all about practical, vocational education, and then there's this idea of a set of moral values. Okay, women, upper class women, were educated. They were taught by tutors at home, and then writers. They became writers and poets, except they would still generally write under male pseudonyms. Okay, slavery was for the wealthy, generally war captives during this time, and slaves were permitted to marry and have families. And that's a little different than we've seen, especially in other parts of the world, or chattel slavery in the Americas, right? Is that in a lot of cases they weren't allowed to marry, or they would marry outside of legal ways of doing that. Okay. Slaves could earn money, that they could keep it, and they could purchase their freedom at some point. They were generally used for large farms, and you would enslave the mass amounts of slaves that would take care of that. This is going to start to die off in the Roman Empire, but in the early Roman Republic, this is what's going on. Okay, and you'd get slave rebellions. So that's kind of an idea of the overview of this week. So the 2 chapters and some of the extra readings that I want you to look at this week, and then be able to do the discussions about families and the Roman Republic versus the transition, to just make sure that you're taking a look at some of those things. Okay. Next week, I'll do a video on Christianity. That is a much larger discussion, and one that I didn't think that I could fit onto the end of this video. And so hopefully you get an idea of what it is that we're looking for when you're talking about families in the early Roman Republic, and then that transition from Republic to Empire. Take a look at that as you're doing the reading, try to understand that a little bit better, and then flesh those things out in the discussion. And then as you've already taken the Unit 1 exam, you'll know that however you flesh that out, you're going to need to somehow have some understanding that you can then put into the Unit 2 exam or the midterm. So good luck with everything. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm available by email, phone, or you can stop by my office in Taylor 262. Good luck. We'll see you next week.